The Poison Tree by Rebecca Miles. Trees are wondrous things, from their strong trunks to their delicate leaves. They feed from the sun and feel its warm rays far longer than we humans do, pausing under their broad branches, perhaps to shelter from the rain, perhaps to listen to the rustling of the leaves, another language just as expressive as our own. Sometimes we try to capture what the tree means to us in words. Such things as from little acorns great oaks grow, perhaps your dad has told you that. Or let your roots grow deep so your leaves can dance in the sun is a favorite of your mom's. Enchanting words plucked from those enchanting trees. But this story is about a different sort of tree, one whose fruit you should not pick and certainly not eat, however tempting it looks. This tree grows within the pages of fairy tale. It grew from a seed which should never have been sown, let alone been permitted to prosper, the seed of envy. This story begins long ago and far away, and this is how it starts. There was a beautiful girl, an envious queen, and a rosy apple poisoned to the core. And who had poisoned it? Well, the jealous old queen, of course. Tricking the girl with the luscious-looking fruit. One bite was all it took for death to deal its blow. The lovely maiden was sealed in a glass casket where all could wonder at her eternal beauty. For although days and weeks, then months and years passed, the young woman remained seemingly asleep while others stooped, grayed, and passed away. The queen thought she had had her cake, and eaten it too. Still, she couldn't stop herself from walking past the glass casket. Weekly, then daily, then twice a day. She would stop by, and slowly a terrible realization dawned on her. Death had stolen none of the young maiden's beauty. The only one robbed was her of any sense of satisfaction. Envy was like a worm burrowing silently deep into a fruit. The worm of envy had eaten right to the core of the queen. Its canker lived and flourished in her very heart. Yes, she had tricked the lovely young woman into taking the apple, had rejoiced when she bit, fell, and was entombed. Her plan had worked, but the beautiful girl had, nevertheless, cheated her of victory's sweet taste, for although she breathed no more, the queen had not vanquished her beauty. No, it lived on, undefeated, in her smooth unlined skin and shining hair. In her palace, the queen glanced into her beloved gilded mirror. In the past she had spied on the lovely young woman, sickened by her blossoming beauty which had surpassed her own. Now it was beloved no longer because its reflection reminded her of the maiden's ultimate victory. She had cheated age and was a vision of youth eternal, while she, the worker of wonders, was powerless to halt the march of time across her face. Deep within her the worm twisted, tying all her initial joy into knots. When she could bear it no longer, she plotted a second time. Creeping into the maiden's house, she crawled on hands and knees across the carefully swept floor, until she found the apple, still perfectly preserved in its poison loveliness despite its one missing bite. Hiding it in the folds of her cloak, she slipped home to the palace garden. Clearing brambles and nettles, hefting the spade herself, she dug a hole and buried the fruit, not to rid herself of the poisoned fruit, or the memory of her terrible actions. No, as she planted the fruit deep in the earth, she muttered a spell. May all who sup of the fruit from this tree lose what rules them, indefinitely. Shoveling the soil, she imagined the young woman losing not just her life, but beauty's power finally weakening before losing its hold. Every day, morning and night, rain or shine, the queen would hurry out to her garden. Standing over the soil, she would weep tears of envy, rage, but also hope that her monstrous plan might bear fruit and succeed. And slowly, more than the rain, more than the sun, the water from her eyes woke the apple's seeds, for, like the queen, they had been waiting for the chance to work some fresh evil. When the first shoot broke the soil, she wept tears of elation. The shoot strengthened into a sapling, grew thicker, hardier, branches casting shade, and one monumental spring day the apple tree, with its ebony bark, bore blossoms as white as snow. The queen had long since dried her tears. Now she smiled a thin smile to see the blossoms tremble and tumble from the boughs, in their place, apples as red as blood. Her plan was bearing fruit, time would bring the harvest. A prince from a neighboring land rode by and was captivated by the maiden, so lovely even in death. Summoning his royal powers, he asked for the casket to be opened, which of course it duly was. With a jolt they raised the lid, and the piece of apple, never swallowed, dislodged, and the sleeper woke from her death-like slumber. The queen rejoiced. She herself could hardly believe it, but she rubbed her hands and threw her head back, howling with delight. Here was her chance to do the job properly. This time beauty, along with life, would surrender to her magic powers. Even news of a royal wedding in the neighboring land could not dampen her bliss. And when a footman dressed in green velvet knocked at her door, delivering her invitation to the couple's wedding, she smiled with awful pleasure. "We cordially request the pleasure of your company at our wedding feast." Hurriedly she penned a reply. "I would be honored to attend and will be happy to provide dessert." She closed the door, picked up a basket, and went into her garden. The queen knew that revenge is a dish best served cold, even if her envy had been simmering ever since the girl had thwarted her first plan. As she plucked apple after apple from the tree, placing them carefully in her basket, she considered which dish would best deliver the revenge she had in mind, but from apple pie to crisp, no recipe seemed just right. She rested the heavy basket on her kitchen table and picked up the paring knife, splitting the fruits, gouging out cores, wresting the pips from their snug beds, cutting slice after slice, white flesh rimmed with a deep blood red. As she worked, she looked in her mirror propped against her pots of spice, dried onion, powdered tears, and chili flakes to raise a fever. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the cleverest one of all?" she crooned to herself. Her cold eyes stared back at her and inspiration struck. A tart taken it would be. That most lovely of apple puddings would be her foe's downfall, her just desserts. Carefully she placed the slices, arranging them in spirals before making the sauce, melting the sugar, cubing the butter, stirring until it oozed from the wooden spoon when she lifted it like threads of sticky honey. Finally, she brushed the apples, crowning the dish with its pastry hat before popping it into the oven. 45 minutes to wait. After the long years of watching her rival triumph, in death as much as life, it was no time at all. When it was bronzed and the kitchen was filled with the glorious scent of home baking, the queen turned the tart onto its crystal platter, noting with satisfaction that the apples had darkened to amber, the poison to trap her fly. The sugars had seeped out a little, and she had to resist the temptation to lick her fingers as she carried the sticky confection to the door. The wedding feast was due to be celebrated the next day, but the queen was not prepared to leave her plan a moment longer, summoning her coachman to bring her carriage immediately. 4 beautiful black horses were harnessed. The carriage drew up to her door, and the queen stepped lightly inside, resting her wedding gift, the lustrous dessert, on the crimson seat beside her. The coachman flicked his whip and the steeds sprang to a gallop. The queen settled herself back against the sumptuous cushions. The wheels of her plot were turning, and she couldn't have been happier. From the carriage window she saw the palace come into sight. She had been expecting turrets and towers, imagining the lady would demand a home as lovely as herself. The reality was a surprise. Her foe's residence was more a house than a palace. It didn't dominate the land. If anything, it looked small, almost ordinary. The carriage drew to a halt. The door was opened, and the queen almost forgot to pick up her terrible tart in her shock and confusion. Steadying herself at the steps, she carefully alighted and made her way to the front door, cradling the dish carefully in the snug of her arm. Before she had a chance to knock, the door was opened, and the lovely young maiden, her foe, stood in the entrance, wearing an apron and a smile. The queen took 2 steps back in surprise, but the bride seemed unfazed, moving forward and taking the tart from the visitor before it was even offered. "So kind," smiled the wife-to-be. "The footman gave me your reply, and how lucky that I just love apples." "A pleasure, my dear," managed the queen, unsettled by the bride's appearance. Crumpled clothes, smudges on her cheeks from cooking, and was that a gray hair glistening in her ebony locks. The woman noticed her puzzled stare but only laughed. "Oh, you must excuse my appearance. I'm helping with the wedding feast. And since I woke from that long sleep, time seems to have been catching up with me a bit. Busy working woman and all that." She took the queen's elbow and guided her into the kitchen, which was a busy chaos of platters and pots, tureens and tumblers. The bride cleared a space for the dessert and pulled 2 champagne flutes towards her. "We must have a drink, a toast before tomorrow. We are neighbors now after all." The queen demurred. "Oh no, my dear, I've reached an age where I can't touch a drop." The bride uncorked a green bottle and a scent, strangely familiar, filled the air. "Well, this can be drunk entirely guilt-free. Water, fruit and nothing else, I promise," she said coyly. "Just a little taste now, on the eve of my special day." She pressed a glass into the queen's protesting hands and took one herself. And somehow the queen couldn't stop herself from raising it to her lips, like an invisible hand was lifting the glass too, and the queen was compelled to drink to the toast. "May all who sup of the fruit from this tree lose what rules them, indefinitely." The queen had to swallow the sweet drink, managing to gasp fitfully through the bubbles. "But how? How did I know about your plan?" "Well, I took the trouble of getting a mirror of my own. You could say that I learned from experience to keep both eyes peeled for trouble." And she crossed to a mirror gilded and oddly familiar, which reflected a kitchen the queen knew all too well, for it was her own. "When I saw you making your dessert and casting your spell, I thought it might be time to pay a visit to your tree and work a little magic of my own. I hope you don't mind. There were so many apples, I didn't think you'd miss a few." The queen couldn't answer as the drink was working its magic. Deep inside, the worm of envy, which had burrowed so deep, a parasite within her so long, was writhing in agony. In its death throes it lashed and squirmed until, finally, it ruled over her no longer and was gone. Finally, she was free. Standing before her now was a foe no longer, simply a woman, a neighbor with wise words to impart. But perhaps, on reflection, it might be best if we both got rid of our mirrors. Staring into them too much can be a damaging pastime, at any age. The queen looked at the bride with her crumpled clothes, smudged cheeks and one gray hair, recognizing her for what she was, a fellow woman and a sister to embrace. She crossed to the rubbish bin and tipped her tart inside. Then she smiled, refilling both their glasses, and raised hers to the lovely bride. A toast to friendship, the most beautiful thing of all. I'll Never Desert You by Kevin Alfatuni. My eyes fluttered open at the first light of day. Grayish hues scattered across the dawn-lit sky, the ambient rays of the rising sun peeking over the distant horizon and beaming down trace amounts of warmth to a cold desert. I sat up and watched it for a bit, my eyes blinking lazily while I tried to find the energy to get myself up. I wished I could stay, lay on the soft grass, and enjoy the full extent of the morning, but unfortunately, duty called. I looked around the hidden oasis. Everything seemed so still and beautiful at this hour. I yawned, did a couple of stretches to get the blood moving, and then stood. I started making my way over to the center of the oasis where the waters pooled, its surface as smooth as glass. Along the way, I passed the boulder where Mr. Lizard waited for the sun to warm his reptilian blood. "Hello, Mr. Lizard," I said. "How are you this fine morning?" Mr. Lizard slowly craned his head up at me and blinked each eye. "Good, I suppose," he grumbled. "Oh, come now, today looks like it's gonna be a good one." Mr. Lizard closed his eyes, flattened himself out, and mumbled something I could not understand. "What?" I asked. "Talk to me later, Gary." "Oh." Mr. Lizard could be such a grouch in the morning. There was a flapping of wings overhead, and then a falcon perched itself atop one of the trees bordering the waters of the oasis. "Ah, Gary," she called. "Good morning to you." Good morning, Miss Falcon, I said with a smile. What news do you bring? So far, it looks like you might have 3 today. 3, you say? Yup, they are walking the South Dune Trail and have been for some time now. They'll need a resupply of water before nightfall. Better get moving. Thanks for the update. Miss Falcon screeched, flapped her wings, and departed to the north. I made my way over to the pool and leaned over its reflective edge, my long neck craning down to its pristine surface. Staring back at me was my reflection, a smiling, happy camel. I loved my job of bringing water to people in need. It was a trait I learned from my former master. A great man he was, possessing nothing but the desire to help others in need. He lived out here, in this oasis, living a hermit's life, and he was my most cherished friend. During the day, we would walk the dunes together, looking for weary travelers, and every night, when we would return, we would gaze up at the night sky while he gently pet me behind the ear until I fell asleep. Unfortunately, a few years back, he accidentally stepped on a scorpion's nest and the vile thing stung him. He died, but I vowed to continue what he started, delivering water to people in need until I drew my last breath. Just as I had done many times before, I began transferring mouthfuls of water into a 3-foot wooden barrel with a leather strap attached to it. It was a tedious chore, and just as I was finishing, Mrs. Squirrel and her family came from their burrow and sat next to me. Once done, the family hoisted the nearby wooden lid and used its latches to secure it to the barrel. I slid my head through the strap, and Mrs. Squirrel adjusted the neck pad. Then, I hoisted the barrel up and allowed it to slide down to the base of my neck. Once the family fitted the strap, I started on my journey. Have a good day at work, Gary, Mrs. Squirrel called. Thanks, I shouted back and then set out across the sandy dunes in search of the 3 travelers. After about 12 miles, I came across the first who struggled his way up a large dune. As I approached, he looked at me, his black eyes peering through the long, gray scarf wrapped around his head and covering his face from the sun. The pack he carried looked dangerously flat. We walked toward each other and, once together, I stood still while he filled his water skins from the barrel. When he was finished, he reached up and pet the top of my head. I smiled. Thank you, the man said, and then patted my hump and continued on his way. A few hours later, I found the second traveler and replenished his water supply. After scratching me beneath my chin and petting my neck, he too continued on his way. 2 down, 1 to go. I hunted the dunes for the 3rd traveler, but as the sun's heat intensified, I started to fear the worst. I had about another hour left before I had to turn around and head back to the oasis as the desert wasn't safe at night. That's when the predators came out and they loved to ambush unsuspecting prey. Just as I was about to give up, I saw a small shape in the distance, laying on the shaded side of a large dune. Oh my gosh. Am I too late? I ran as fast as I could, water sloshing around in the barrel with each trot, some of it dripping out through the tap. When I finally saw what it was, I gasped. It was an adolescent man. A nervousness took hold of me. Young men made up for most of those who died in the desert, always wanting to push the boundaries of their limitations but lacking the experience to do so. I ran to him. He did not move. I placed one of my feet on his chest and slowly rocked him back and forth. He still did not move. I kicked him. He did not make a sound. Eventually, I did the one thing my late master told me never to do and spat. The thick globule of saliva hurtled through the hot air with deadly accuracy, splattering on his face. Finally, the man stirred, spittering and sputtering to keep the spit from entering his mouth. After he wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve, he looked up at me as if I were sent from the heavens and used my leg as a brace to pick himself up. He filled his 2 canteens with water, drank half of one, and then filled it again. Finally, he pet my neck and said, "Thank you, Mr. Camel. I would have been lost without you." I smiled and he continued on his way. I trailed behind him for a bit to ensure he was okay and then headed back to the oasis, arriving just as the sun touched the western horizon. "Gary," Mr. Lizard called once I was in sight. "How'd you do today?" "3 for 3 today." "Nice job." I walked over to the pool and set the barrel down at the shore. After taking many gulps of water for myself and grazing on some grass, I laid down between 2 bushy shrubs. Mr. Lizard skittered over, climbed up my side, and started licking the back of my neck where the leather strap rubbed my skin raw. Once the numbing compounds of his saliva started to work their magic, I gave a lazy yawn and stared off toward the west and waited for the colors of the sunset to paint themselves across the sky. Just like the morning, all was still and quiet, and it was times like these when I missed my master terribly. I looked over to the side of the oasis. A bleached white skeleton lay atop a fertile patch of grass, bones picked clean, courtesy of Mr. Buzzard. A single tear streamed down my fuzzy cheek. "Even in death, I will continue to serve you." Then, I lay my head down and was fast asleep, eager to start the next day. A story about someone trying to become a better person by Ruby Gower. Here is a story about someone trying to become a better person. Here is a carnival and a summertime of any year and lights and people and joyful screaming. Look at the sturgeon moon stamped onto the black sky. Now, if you would, walk out of the crowd and into a darker part of the carnival. You can come back later. After a silent walk along slick, dark grass. Yes, I know, a carnival in the dark? You're too bound by habit. Have a little imagination. Anyway, after your walk, here is a single booth. Here is a man in a dark suit, standing in his single booth. And here are the lamb heads stuck to the walls, eyes crusted with blood, definitely alive once and definitely not now. Now we have the pieces. Watch. Here is a young woman, young by her own standards, anyway, with dark hair and a blue silk scarf. Watch her steps, focused and measured. Here is the wet grass of the carnival field and the man's raised head and small, ugly smile as she approaches the booth with practiced shyness. "It's 25 tokens to try," he says quietly. Here comes her nod. 25 tokens to try. Tale as old as time. Here is the purse and the plastic coins and the hands briefly touching. No, not like that. She is married and he is not that kind of man. And here is the dagger, silver and angry. See how the woman looks at the knife, like it could kill her itself without her intervention. Remember that this is a story about someone trying to become a better person, if you can. Now, if you will, watch the man as he turns into the darkness of the booth. He's walking out in his polished black shoes to the backyard. It's quieter back here, away from the noise of the carnival. There's a reason he chose to put his stand a little ways away. This needs silence. He comes to a stop in front of the tall wooden fence. See, and I am sorry about this, but see the agitated lambs behind the backer rails. He's picking one of them up at random. He's a businessman, not a monster. He doesn't care which one dies. The lamb, of course, is bleeding and kicking and screaming, and the woman is waiting patiently outside, the way young women with dark hair and blue scarves are wont to do, and the man is walking steadfastly back to the booth as the lamb screams for, what, its mother. The fence. See her fingers run over the hilt of the dagger. Watch as she bites her lip. She has a question. Is it very painful? A pause. Remember what this story is about. Always remember. Watch as the man puffs his chest as he answers. No. As long as you do it well. He means to encourage her to hit the heart. Many other patrons hit the stomach, and you know how that goes. I will. Pay attention now. She is tensing her arm and clenching her jaw. He is doing the same. Who is more frightened? Well, anyway, an adult sheep is tied up 100 yards away, straining at her rope. Look at her panic, not a slaughterhouse panic, but a motherly one. A panic of running to rather than running away. He closes his eyes, and she steadies something snake-like writhing inside herself. He lets go of the lamb and whistles in an entirely non-musical way. Here, watch. The lamb is running across the fairground and her mother is bleating in joy, and the lamb's dark animal eyes are shining and catching the light of the stars. This is deeply joyous, but you want to see the woman and the knife and the man. I know. Well, fine. Here she is throwing the dagger, something in her face dying as she lets go of the hilt with a practiced flick of the wrist. Here is the dagger spinning out. And here is the lamb stumbling on its long lamb legs, almost to its big sheep mother who will keep it warm forever. She misses. The knife hits the ground, piercing the soil. The woman's hair looks a little less dark as she retrieves it and throws it again at the hesitant lamb. Daggers are faster than carnival-dwelling lambs, so watch, if you can, as the blade slices through the air for a second time. The lamb keeps its little lamb face on its mother's soft sheep body. The dark-haired woman averts her eyes and swallows down something dark before it can reach her lips or the cool night air. But wait, she begins to shout in confusion and anger, but the lamb's white wool remains unstained with blood. So what can be the reason? Well, you are watching the lamb and the knife and the woman, and you have forgotten to watch the man, haven't you? Here he is running as the woman shouts angrily. Here is the man running across the slick grass trying to catch the knife as it draws closer to the inside the caverns of the lamb's chest. Here is the look of terror on his face, of regret and speed and trying to make up for it all. Here is the knife and the man and the man and the knife and the woman and the lamb and the knife and the knight and the Ferris wheel and the booth and the mother sheep straining at her rope. Here is the man and the woman colliding as he uses his man body to stop her from taking up the dagger for a third time. And here she is in understandable shock. After all, he said 25 tokens to try, and she's paid her 25 tokens, so what's this? Here is hand-grazing dagger hilt and woman falling silent. Men, as a rule, can't run faster than daggers any more than lambs can. And this particular man can't run faster than dark-haired women with blue scarves. So, here is the dagger thrown for the third time as the lamb stands by its mother. Nobody can quite believe what's happened. Then, here is a screaming lamb and an agitated silent mother stomping at the wet carnival grass. Here is a lamb that isn't screaming anymore, but, oh, a man that is. Watch him as he falls to his knees in his expensive carnival suit, wailing to nothing, kneeling outside his out-of-the-way booth. The woman's lips form a thin line as she stands up. He is screaming and crying, and the lamb is twitching, and the knife is completely silent in a rather self-satisfied way. What the hell is that? He won't stop yelling and kissing the lamb's face and grabbing its hooves and holding his hand over its bleeding stomach. He won't stop shouting thick apologies to the silent sheep standing over him. Just watch for a second. Don't forget who opened the booth. He stops screaming and grabs at the mother sheep's wool. Silence. The woman with dark hair and a blue scarf can't decide whether to stay or go. She's young enough to stay. Have you noticed the man's eyes? He doesn't have spectacles, by the way. They're big and brown and dark, and so are the mother sheep's. He takes the dagger from the lamb's stomach, which makes its body shiver. Here are two pairs of eyes. Here is one set of hooves and one set of manhands. Here is a thud of impact. Here is a perfectly placed wound. Here is puncturing vein and sheep's eyes dying and a second scream, third scream, fourth scream because now the woman is screaming. She should have been old enough to leave. The man recovers quicker this time. Watch. Now both a mother and her daughter are dead, not just one, and things seem more in balance. Wretched mirrors and all that. He stands up and brushes the carnival dew off his carnival suit. You can take them both if you'd like. The woman is shocked. Watch her face in the moonlight. She's older than she'll tell you. Blame society, if you'd like. But, then, she's not that old, so blame her histrionic personality, if that suits you better. But I didn't want you to do that. She says, almost a wail. She did. The sheep told you. I was trying to be better. You've remembered the point of all of this, haven't you? The dark-haired woman purses her lips. You probably shouldn't run this stand, then. He wasn't expecting this. He drops his voice. I know. Actually, I will take both. The lamb and the sheep. Please. He falls silent, looks at her as a betrayer. I'm under no obligation to be better myself. She says, impatient. It'll be 10 extra. Seriously? No. Thank God. He nods. I can bag them myself, says the woman. She's not really asking, but she's not really telling. I don't know. You decide, but remember it's not terribly important. He nods and they walk over to the booth together, both trying very hard not to look back at the two white bodies lying in the grass that is rapidly becoming crusted, not dripping, with blood. Do you mind if I leave you to it? He says eventually, sticking a fork through the pretty silence. Not at all. A few more paces from both of them. There are plastic bags in the cupboard under the cash register. Don't, take any money. This man is remarkably tactless. Don't be ridiculous. Ha. Well, they're my wages. Don't leave me alone with your cash register, then. Here is a woman with a point. Here is a man averting his eyes as she walks behind the booth. I'm leaving now, he says, darkly serious. He looks at her with deep distrust. The woman remembers her mother, and she also remembers the open but uneaten bag of granola she has at home, which is going to go stale if she doesn't do something with it. Maybe trail mix or cookies or just breakfast. Okay, I'll get the bags, then I'll leave too. She knows he wants to hear that she understands. It helps with trusting sometimes. You understand. Here is a man turning away. Here is a man passing the bodies of a mother and a daughter and trying not to slip on the wet grass. Here is a man walking towards the lights of a carnival and getting on a Ferris wheel and watching a woman as she does exactly as promised. She's quick and neat bagging the sheep. Her blue scarf blows in the wind. Her skin is golden in the infant sunrise. He feels nothing. Here is a man who is thinking about sailing to France and the sheep in the fields of Old England and not working in a carnival for the rest of his life. Here is a story about someone trying to become a better person.